Hello and welcome to a discussion about the past with two people that are a bit older, but not quite that old. How are you doing, Jared? My good friend Jared here is here from the Fantasy Thinker. Finally got you on my channel. How are you doing?
Awesome. I've been waiting my whole YouTube life to come on here.
Yes, I've been on Jared's channel a couple of times, and if anybody's been following the channel, you realise that I haven't posted that much on my own channel, although being plenty busy in BookTube, I think, per
Yes,
se.
you
But
have.
great to have my good friend, one of my best friends on BookTube, Mr.
Agreed.
Jared
Agreed.
here. Yes, indeed.
Yes, sir.
And if you like our discussions in general, if you head over to Jared's channel or otherwise on patreon.com, you'll find both of us with plenty to talk about there. But we're here to talk about The Great Wayne by Alan Moore, which I have to admit is all your fault, Jared, because you kind of said you were reading it kind of in the background. And when I was walked into my bookstore, I went, well, there's a copy of the Alan Moore novel, Great Wayne. I thought, I'll just
There
pick
it
it up
is.
and I'll stick it in the bookshelf and never read it. And I just had that feeling when you're mood reading and kind of went, we'll make a start in this and see how it goes. And then I finished
Yeah,
it before you,
you did. Yeah,
which
it's
is
funny.
nice.
My very first review on BookTube was Alan Moore's Illuminations collection,
Right.
uh, way back when I started, and I actually got that out of the library at the time, and and I liked it. It was great. Uh,
Yeah.
and I was like, all right. But I never really thought about what's Alan Moore doing next, you know? He's been around so long
Yeah.
that I wasn't on the lookout for what he does next, and all of a sudden there's an announcement that he's putting out a fantasy novel. And I was like, "Bam, yeah, all right." So
Let's
my wife got
see
it for
what
me
this
for
is
my
about.
birthday, and bam, in we go.
Yeah, indeed. Because funny enough, I just picked up Illuminations today. I was in the bookshop today, and they had a copy of Illuminations in paperback, and I went, right, well, I'll pick that up because that's one of the reasons we're doing this talk is because I think the two of us enjoyed this quite a lot, as it turned out for a multitude of different reasons, which I'm sure we'll get into. But yeah, I think it's fair to say that I mostly knew Alan Moore from graphic novels, comics, a bit
Sure,
like yourself, Jared. Yeah,
absolutely.
probably the most famed creator in that space. I can't think of too many that you would put above him in the fame stage, where you can talk about quality and whether people are fans of other people together. But I think he's probably the most famous person in that
Yeah.
space, maybe
Well,
outside of Stan Lee.
especially outside of the comic book community,
Yes,
he's
yes,
well known, beyond, because there's a lot of quote famous comic book people, but
that's
only
true.
known by comic book people.
Yeah,
And, so he's well known outside of it. And he's probably one of the most influential comic book writers over the past 40, 50 years.
yeah. So well famed as a writer, and as I would often say about Mr. Moore, he is the person who has written a comic book worthy of being many in top book lists of all time. Like Watchmen is usually the one that breaks in and breaks across that kind of that heavy load. And to be for Vendetta and From Hell, he's quite a lot of them that he could that are all heady works, I would say, in a lot of ways. But I'd never really read any of his prose beforehand, so you're kind of wondering whether this is going to be ideas and little substance and all of that kind of stuff. So I think in general we're going to talk about what the book's about. So if anybody's kind of checking out the stream, kind of thinking to themselves, right, I don't even know anything about this book, much like I didn't know anything about it, we're going to talk about what the Wayne or what the Great Wayne is about, and about the quality of the prose and that kind of stuff. So you've done a rather magnificent review on your channel that I watched earlier on today. So if this comes out a bit later and people haven't got that, I'll stick the link down in the review.
Oh,
But
thank you.
what do you think of it about it, or do you want to set the scene for what you think it's sort of about?
Well, yeah, it says it's a long London novel, so it is about London.
London.
London is in itself a character in this book. The setting is beautiful described and completely in depth. So anything, if you're a Londanophile or whatever you want to call it,
Yeah,
you're
that
gonna
works.
love this book because it really it's really, wonderful, and even has the lovely map in the beginning,
Yeah.
which you can follow along and as you're reading. It's really interactive in that sense, and it takes place in post World War II,
Hmm.
1949 specifically, oddly enough, a year after George Orwell's 1984
84.
came out,
Yeah.
which, of course, Dennis is a big fan. Dennis is our main character, and he's a big
Yeah.
fan of that book. And I think there's a few similar thematic resonances between that book and this one,
Yeah.
although quite in Alan Moore style. It's not a copy or pastiche by any means,
Yeah.
but but anyways, the so that setting is there's a lot of war hangover in the city. There's a lot of people remember the bombings, and they remember the chaos of the war, and the devastation that it took out of the nation and out of the economy and everything else. And so out of that, we have our main character, Dennis, a young,
Mr.
strapping
Knuckleyard.
man, Mr.
Great name.
Knuckleyard.
Brilliant. I actually love the bit at the end of the book where Alan Moore describes when he woke up laughing one day when he kind of dreamt about it and kind of woke up and thought, oh, that is a great name. He was sort of proud of himself, and it is a great name. Dennis Knuckleyard says so much, but is also kind of fun every time you see it in the page.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's funny because that's a good point about it being fun on the page, because he does that with his name, but he doesn't overdo it. You know, it just every once in a while he picks that right moment to say knuckle yard. It cracks you up, and so Dennis, and he seems like a nice kid, seems like a nice young gentleman, nice young adult, and and it's very interesting because we get to follow his journey
Yeah.
through this situation, the uh, the the conflicts that arise in his situation. He starts off as kind of a passive character.
Very
Things
much so.
happen to him, but he grows as the story goes on, and it's really a natural, wonderful transition of what he becomes as a character. So if you like that kind of coming of age type of thing, I think Alan Moore plays with that trope probably better than anybody that I've seen, and it's really done well.
Yeah, I love that point actually, Jared, because he's called Knuckleyard, but he's a bit of a knucklehead.
Yeah.
If that thinks, he's kind of
Well,
painted as a kind of.
aren't all 18-year-olds and
Well,
knuckleheads?
that's the point I was going to make. He's very plain as a bit of a patsy in the book that he's kind of not good. But I suppose this says an awful lot about post-war London. Or he's very well read. He works for a bookshop essentially. And that kind of stuff. So in modern senses, he's literate, and he's all that kind of stuff. He's very much the opposite of a knucklehead in some ways. But we get to experience London through his very, innocent eyes through it, and I think that it helps with the world building a lot in it, because he has a sense of wonder about every time he goes in a new situation. It's new to him. He's not really used to dealing with things outside of a very simple life. He basically sleeps in the back room of his workplace for Coffinera, as we'll come back to, um, and everything that happens to him we experience the first time, like talking to women, having friends, going out to the pub. All of those things are all kind of new to him and very exciting in some way, and it kind of translates through the pages and through the words, and it makes it very kind of exciting to read, even when some of the things are mundane that he's doing,
Sure.
and fantastical. And by the time the fantasy part of it starts to kick in, and I think it's fair to say, without giving too much away, it is a sort of portal fantasy book, without going into any kind of things. There is a portal fantasy element to it. And he experiences things that are very different from like a week ago. I often think this book's very much about the week in somebody's life, how it can change kind of in total from one thing to the other, to going from a knucklehead to sort of being at the center of an awful lot of crazy stuff that's going along, and people looking to you for leadership in some ways at that stage. And I think for anybody that has been a young boy or young person, we sort of that coming of age part of it is very satisfying to read.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I agree. Yeah.
So,
So, you know, we can say like right in the prologue, we're told that there's going to be magic.
yeah,
You know, uh, you know, and I'm still not 100% sure how the prologue is going to fit
connects.
connect because I think that's going to be something that's going to come down the road here.
Yeah,
So the stuff in the prologue, they give you a little bit of hints. There's a little bit of hint about Dennis towards the end of it, but there's also you're introduced to a couple of people who deal with magic, or at least they say they
hmm
do. And I just love I like their interaction. But but the point is he's telling you right away that there's something different about
yeah,
this London than our normal mundane world.
yeah. And we also get the section at the start where we see a slightly younger Dennis
Yeah,
experiencing the war, and the events that
yes,
happened in the war, and kind of that. And I think it does a couple of things. It kind of shows about the shocking nature of the war and the after effects of the war, but it also kind of gives this idea that London is being rebuilt or is being kind of grown up around him in much the same way that the
right.
real London is going to contrast with the other London, if that makes sense. So it kind of has this kind of double kind of meaning, and I think the whole concept, I don't think I appreciated when I was reading it, especially at the start, how clever all of that was going to be. Because I think I'd said to you when we were discussing this beforehand, Jared, it's the kind of book, the more that you get into it and the more the world kind of reveals itself to you, the more enjoyable and the more enriching
Yeah.
that you find it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I could easily see somebody reading this prologue and not thinking much about it at all.
Yeah,
Uh, and and when I got to the end of the book, I was like, oh, I got to look at that again. Because I know there was stuff that I missed because I just it just doesn't seem to relate to the rest of the story until you go back to it and say, oh, wait a minute, yeah, okay, all right, there's stuff in there,
yeah.
there's stuff in there that's going to come into play later. There's stuff in there that affects Dennis, our guy.
And I don't think the start of the book and the prologue kind of sets up what really the possibilities of the world are, because again, the very concept at the start is that Dennis has been sent on an errand by his boss to go pick up a box of books, but he has to work out a price, and if he can work out a good enough price for himself, he can keep the change. And you know, I think I'll stop there. But essentially, he argues what he thinks is too good a deal to be true, and enter the events of the book. But like, to be honest, those kind of events all took me by surprise, because we just sort of, like, at the start, I just sort of wanted Dennis, who's presented as quite a simple character, to have a few quid to go and enjoy myself. Like, I was very excited by the fact that he could maybe have a few pounds spare, because he had a very poor existence and he was kind of living hand to mouth in some ways for a boss who seemed like the a bit of a crazy character. She's a lot of fun, as it turns out. But
Oh yeah,
yeah, a good old Coffinata with the double meaning of Coffinata right
oh
in
yeah,
there.
yep,
Uh,
outstanding.
yeah, so cough, 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 everything that happens to him. And coffin as in the thing you get buried in.
Yeah,
She's great fun.
yep,
Yeah,
yeah, wonderful character.
yeah. And I think that sets the tone for basically the entire book then, Jared, because it is one great character after great character. It's like we go through a period where every chapter we're introduced to a new person that's almost certainly your new favorite character in the book.
Mm,
I think there's a couple of standouts. I am sort of interested to see where the series goes, because I think it's worth saying this is the first book of 5. And I think by what I believe that every book will skip 10 years. You've got to imagine that we're going to follow Dennis in that, but it might mean that we lose some characters. And I have to admit, I will be very sad to not read about some of these characters in future books. Like, oh, I'll be devastated in a lot of ways, um, with that kind of idea. But we shall see.
yeah, we shall see. Yeah, we might lose a couple. Uh, I mean, of course, in any fictional fantasy novel, you can lose characters at any time,
Oh, absolutely, yeah,
uh, but But if it progresses, like you said, every decade, then it's more expected that you will lose a couple of them because they're
Indeed.
older, So, um, and hopefully, it's not something that, um, or maybe hopefully it is, depending on how much drama we want.
Yeah.
So, but it very well could pass that its natural causes or something like
Yeah.
that, which wouldn't be a bad thing. It would be hopefully
Progression
something
of life. Yeah.
progression of life and reflective and but we'll see but there's quite a few characters that have the potential to be there for the whole thing and
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they are. The seeds are sown here. To touch back on the prose or writing style, I have to say, I think the prose is beautiful in this. I think the writing is fabulous. And it really, the events of the book and the way that he's chosen to structure it really give himself the opportunity to kind of show off a little bit because
oh, he
he
does.
uses language in lots of different ways. It's like almost it's a fun book. It has kind of like a narrative that's quite serious going through it, but it always has a playfulness to it. There always is a tongue in cheek humor. It's almost
Yeah,
like I'm reading a bit of Discord at the moment. There's touches of Pratchett in it, I think, as well, in terms of some of the wordplay and the things that I do, the way characters talk to each other and interact with each other. I think there is a sense of play and fun a lot of the way through it that I think gives it another kind of level than just straight Portal Fantasy or otherwise.
yeah, no, it's a lot of fun and you could actually spend quite a bit of time deciphering some of the
Mm,
sections in here and what they mean and what the language means and what he's what kind of double meanings he's
yeah,
given to things and and admittedly he has some sections that I got a little lost with some of the dialogue because
yeah,
it's so colloquial to London and it's so broken up and abbreviated and slangish and you really got to take your time and go like okay all right that's what they're saying that's what they mean or even and then we'll get to it when we get to the great win
man,
that's a
yeah.
whole nother level of linguistic strangeness I would say
Yeah. So, it's funny those linguistic devices that he kind of uses with the colloquialism language and the overly descriptive parts that we'll come to. I sort of think he's been very intentional about that because
for sure
again, Dennis and a lot of the characters are street people. They're living on the street. They would definitely have their own language. They're working in shops. It's very much of that time, and I think it almost gives it a slightly older feel than 1949 in terms of, like I said, this at the time when I was reading it. It almost has like an almost Victorian England kind of feel to it because of the close knit community, the sense in the post war, etc., that these people were kind of very looked after each other in
hmm
ways that what kind of modern society doesn't. That those kind of things have went that way, but that they would have their own language, and we as an outsider would be looking at them, judging them because of your language, but also be a little bit lost until we kind of got to live in the world. And as I
yeah
say, as you make your way through the book, you certainly start to feel more comfortable. The kind of problems with what they're talking about or the way they speak to each other maybe disappeared a little bit as I went through the book.
yeah no absolutely I think you're dead on there when you say about the purposefulness of it
Yeah,
because if you um more than likely in as especially in that time period if you w- went into a very isolated type of close knit community
yeah,
they
definitely.
probably would reveal traits more common to 100 years earlier in that
Yeah.
same close knit community than they would if they were more cosmopolitan and exposed to the greater outside world.
Mm,
And so it makes perfect sense that when he is introducing us to these characters in this tight little community, we are still hearing tones of the time of Jack the Ripper and stuff, and
yeah.
late, like you said, late Victorian era, and so that makes perfect sense. And then when you cross that with the other language we're going to come up against, then you get something totally different. And even the underworld figures like Jack Spot
Yep.
have their own little twist on the language as well. So it was really fascinating, and I think you could spend a lot of time just looking at that, studying it, and picking it apart to see what Alan Moore did there, because
Yeah.
he really did something unique, I think.
Yeah. I think he uses the idea of linguistic code very carefully throughout the
That's
book.
a good word. Yeah.
I think he he is his it adds to the great construction of the entire piece, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's not just kind of like a yarn. There's real craft to this, which I mean shouldn't be surprising because this is
Right.
Alan Moore we're talking about here. Like this is one of the great craftsmen of storytelling of any form in some ways. But like everything has feels like it has a purpose, and every character feels like it has a purpose, even with their nicknames and all of that kind of stuff. When we get into the gangster underworld, all of that kind of stuff. Uh, it has its own kind of sense of place, and the Dennis kind of floats between these different codes and these different people in ways that other characters can't float between them, if that makes sense. I think that's one of the real strengths of the book, is that maybe because of his youth and his kind of development, he finds it easier to kind of move from one to the other one. His honesty, who he is as a person, is the bit that lets him translate and work between those different places, and
Yeah.
that everybody sort of likes him in that way for who he is, without him trying to kind of have a pretense or anything that maybe an older character would not
Right.
be able to show.
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed.
So I think we've done setting up what the Wen is about, and if you haven't read the book, I mean, obviously, I encourage you greatly to discuss it. But I think we're going to start to jump into spoilers at this stage, so it means you can pop off at that stage and then catch up. But if you don't mind a few spoilers, we're gonna talk quite in depth
Oh
about
yeah.
kind of the plots, the story, but also about the kind of devices and the kind of the way that the story's told and what that'll mean, and then
Oh
hopefully
yeah.
some promises for the future. So if
Oh
you
yeah.
if you don't mind a few spoilers, we're about to go. We're about to go for
Oh
it.
yeah. I got a lot of notes here. A lot of...
Oh, you tabbed it well. Well, it's funny because I remember at the start when I read maybe about the first third of the book, I went, I mean, I'm really enjoying it, but I'm not sure how much I would have to talk about because we were thinking, well, we'll do a spoiler chat or won't we? And then by the time I got to the end, I went, oh my god, there's a lot to talk about in this book.
That's a lot.
There's so much going on in this book, for good and for bad, and a number of characters, and again you'd expect for an Alan Moore produced story, he has a lot to say about society and
He
all of that
does.
kind of
Yeah.
stuff within what's going on with it. So we'll go back to good old Coffin era and the book story, and again the fact that she has taken in uh, Dennis as a young lad and sort of
Yeah.
looking out for him. And at the start, it definitely seems like she doesn't really have much time for him. At the start, now that progresses as we go through the book, and it gets revealed a bit. But she's very much the stern landlord or landlady, as it could be, kind of putting him in his place and keeping him down so that he can work for cheap, essentially.
Yeah. It's interesting because she doesn't come off as the um, very likable at
Yes.
first, you know, and uh, and it's not until we talk about the whole progression of Dennis's growth. It's not until we grow up with Dennis that we actually start to appreciate who she is and what she's been through, and uh, you know, and she still, has her own quirks as far as her
Definitely, yeah.
attitude towards Dennis, but there's so much deeper there. There's more to her. There's more to the story of her story, and it makes you just appreciate the character more by the time you get to the end. As in the beginning, you're just like, oh, this woman's just treating him horribly.
Yeah. Because at the start of it, we talked about the fact that he's sent away on this errand to buy this set of books from this old book dealer, Harrison, who his closed down business hasn't book spur, and she gives him money. But it's very much she gives him the money going, like, if you can keep the change if you want, but you're an idiot. There's no way you'll bargain him down or otherwise. And it is kind of flippant. And this is very dismissive of Dennis and
Yeah,
what Dennis could do at that stage. And I think we as the character or the reader quite rightly kind of go, oh, I don't like this character very much. She's putting her main character down. She doesn't have an awful lot good in. But contrast that to when he comes back and she discovers the extra book in the box and that he got it for so cheap. And she flips up 180, and we see that she actually is very worried for Dennis, and that she
Mhm.
is, while she sort of do it in still in self protection mode. She's like, oh no, I'm responsible for this to a certain point. I'm responsible for this young man, and while I need to protect myself, here, take the money, do whatever, see what you can do. And she gives him the start of his quest about where to go and what to do about it, which obviously comes back to your door in a little while, even though she sells his
Yeah.
bed and does whatever else, thinking he'll never come back. But she doesn't really have faith that Dennis will be able to do anything with it. But you can see the concern.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I'm like, when she said that, I was just like, ah, that makes so much sense. I sold your bed.
What are you doing back here?
It cracked me up, but because it's just like it's like she expected him not to come back, like
Yeah.
not to succeed, and she was like, because you find out that she's kind of a badass on her own, she's buried people in the backyard, and so, um, you know, Dennis coming back, nah, I I'm gonna sell his bed.
Yeah. But
It's
it
just
also
like,
gives her
wow,
it gives her the appearance that she's not a person to be really trifled with either. Like she's an older
right,
woman and she coughs through every sentence and all the rest of it. But people around know don't mess with Coffinata
right.
because she deals with her enemies in a certain way. And so it kind of gives her that kind of mystique and that bit where Dennis should be afraid of her in some ways because he is terrified of her.
Yeah, yeah, and it's funny because, like, when he interacts with some people, they tell him, "Oh, you've heard about her, right?" And he's like, "What? What do you mean?" And, yeah, she's called Coffin Ada for a reason, not just because
Yeah.
she coughs.
But I think really important, and the reason I start with Coffin because it means that everybody else that he deals with doesn't scare him in the way that they seem to scare everybody else when he deals with Jack Spot and other people. The person that he's most afraid of in the world is Coffinata. And everybody is like a notch below that. So it gives him a sort of false confidence in some ways. Like a lot of these people are properly scary in ways that she's not,
Right.
but he doesn't see it because, that's not, he doesn't have to go home and live with her and kind of be afraid of her and all of that kind of stuff. So I think her role within this is just so central and important to the entire story.
It is, yeah, you're right, because he's actually more willing to go stay with a stranger than go back home and face her, you know? And it's, you're right, that false confidence, that, willingness to just put himself out there that wouldn't be there if Ada would have coddled him in a different
Yeah,
way, and, yeah, so that is hilarious,
yeah,
that whole relationship, and it's something that Moore explores quite a bit in this book, these quirky relationships between people that aren't what they seem on the surface and turn
that's
into
right.
something else as it goes on.
Yeah,
Just in just a really masterful way, subtle stuff.
yeah. And of course, it culminates with. I mean, I thought it was incredibly funny when he gets back from the bookshop the first time and she realizes that he's been stealing a magazine out of the shop to read, and Coffinata is furious with him for doing it, and he tells her that he only just used to borrow it for the night because the book, the magazine itself, has some. Let's say rather revealing pictures of women inside it, and at
Yeah.
that point, when she realizes what he's stealing it for, she starts to laugh at him. And he goes upstairs and he realizes that actually one of the young women in the magazine is Coffinata herself in a much more
That's right.
younger state. And he's reading it, he's realizing in horror what
He's
he's
in the
been
wrong.
looking at, and he can hear the laughing from her downstairs. And I think, again, a great symptom of Moore's kind of tongue in cheek kind of approach to an awful lot of
Yep.
this, of taking this relationship that's almost, adversarial in some ways for him, and kind of he smooths it out a little bit in that moment because they have a new understanding. They never talk about it again, but again,
Nope.
their relationship has changed because of it, and it's so clever.
Oh, yeah. Freaking hilarious.
It really was funny that part.
And then at the end of the book, when he finds out she's only 51, it's he the whole time he's thinking like she's like old and gonna die
On
soon
death's door,
someday.
yep.
I'm
It's
only
not the first time
51.
and the only time, or it's not the only time that he's not very good at getting people's ages. And I think
Yeah,
again,
no, it's
that one later on as a reveal, I think is actually quite chilling
yeah, that
in
one's
its
a
own
little
way.
more serious and chilling.
Yeah,
Her and it's so funny because it contrasts perfectly with Ada's reveal that she's only
yeah,
51 and Grace's reveal that she's only 15.
yeah,
And of course, the numbers are opposite, which
yeah,
makes perfect sense, right? And that was, yeah, that was a bit more like, oh boy, that's the ramifications of that run a lot deeper,
they are
on
indeed.
the, like you said, on the chilling side.
Yeah, because I mean that's a pretty good springboard to get into Grace because I think Grace is an absolutely brilliant character. I will be devastated if
Absolutely.
she doesn't reappear. Her portrayal and journey, her own journey, and their relationship is like this beating heart of the entire novel of this person that's, as it turns out, 15. We don't know that at the time, but is an awful
Yeah.
lot more world-wise than Dennis. But still
Yes.
takes him in and looks after him in ways because she sees somebody that could needs help and that do. And then when we get to the art gallery and that kind of stuff, when she's going around, she's very intelligent, but is having to make her living as a hooker essentially,
Yeah.
and has been for many years. And that reveal that she's 15 kind of brings the seriousness of an awful lot of the events of the book even right back down to earth.
Yeah, it does. It does. And I have a feeling that if you go back and look at the descriptions of where she lives
Mm-hmm.
and what she has and how she acts, you would probably get hints of her youth all along. But of
Yeah,
course, Dennis Knucklehead isn't gonna pick those up.
yeah,
He's just infatuated with how good she looks and stuff, and he's a young man, and he's just that's what he's thinking about, and so he's not going to see those little clues. He's not going to see that stuff, and I guarantee you, it's in there if we looked hard enough.
yeah. Well, I
Because
think
I
it
know
is,
she had a
especially.
thing.
Yeah,
Oh, because
there's
I
a
know
couple
she
of
had a thing with.
interactions.
Oh yeah,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Sorry.
Well, I know she had a thing with stuffed animals, and she had,
Mhm.
and stuff like that. So there was stuff in there. There was clues.
Yeah, the clues that I was going to pick up on was when she get left alone with the other gangsters, and they had taken, they had taken a shining to her, but not in a sexual way. They were
Yeah,
wondering what Dennis was doing with her in a lot of ways. Whether he was looking out for her and whether he had good intentions for her, because they obviously knew she was very young, whereas Dennis had no idea.
yeah,
And
right.
that kind of stuff. And but Dennis is, I mean, as much as we like Dennis, he is still a typical young man. If you know what I mean, he's still just worried about, I wonder could I kiss her someday, that kind of stuff. And even though she
Oh,
keeps
yeah,
on telling him it's never gonna happen, Dennis, never, ever, ever. But she likes his friendship and she likes him as a person. And I think from the very start we realized that Grace is a really good judge of character. That's the one
right.
thing she has, and that she can sense in people, and I think again that in its own right is a very key part of the story because that's used a couple of times throughout the rest of the book.
Yeah, yeah, and that's something that she was probably forced to develop. That getting to knowing whether somebody was a decent chap or not, and so it fits in. It just makes so much sense as we go along here.
Yeah. So it's such a brilliant character. Like it's the small human interactions that I think that really towards the latter half of this when all hell's sort of breaking loose in a lot of other ways. And he would just call to your front door. And there's an innocence in that in some ways. Like he's probably brushed his hair and got his nice tie and shirt on and that kind of stuff, but he's still just calling for a door very innocently as a young man, calling for a young
Yeah,
woman and that kind of stuff. And it gives it such heart and such a grounding in
it
terms
does.
of like a
It
very young
does. Yeah.
relationship, you know.
Yeah, he's such a naive dweeb, and he's really just trying to put his best foot forward, and
Yeah.
and and it's very innocent what he's, he how he approaches it, how he goes about it. He really, he really thinks that I can care for this girl, and and he actually takes a bath, which she had to point out you need a bath, and so it's and it's really sweet in a lot of ways, and so like you said, it just it serves the story so well, and
Yeah.
yeah, great stuff.
Gives the darkness to the light. So
It
their first
does.
meeting is preceded by the first journey into the Great Wen um, when Dennis is getting chased through and finds himself stumbling essentially into this portal fantasy, this
Yeah,
alternate version of London that
London.
is, I mean, it's hard to describe literally because even Moore, when he goes to describe it, it's kind of like an overwhelming of sensations and emotions and experiences all at once. I think we'll come to that in a second. But this idea of the Great Wen, or that there's two types of London being there all of the time, is sort of represented by this book, which is not supposed to belong in our world, but has somehow made its way into our world. It's a book that's referenced in another book, but was never written in our world, but in the alternate universe was, and its very presence constitutes danger or a leaking of one into the other one world into the other one. Um, and that again gets explored right throughout the book, but it kind of sets this idea that the other London is dangerous, but not necessarily in the same way as that our world's dangerous.
Right. Yeah, it's dangerous in the sense that going out into the middle of the wilderness somewhere is dangerous.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
it's not dangerous because it's specifically um, evil or or nefarious or
hmm
trying to purposely. Not dangerous on purpose. It's dangerous because it is. You know.
yeah. And the rules of engagement we don't know about, and neither does Dennis at the start. But although by the time he goes back towards the end of the book, he understands the world a lot more, and he's able to use that to his advantage. To the point that he sort of causes another character's death, which racks him with guilt and all of that kind of stuff. But he
Yeah.
uses his knowledge of that place to a way that you know it shows that it is about getting to know the rules of engagement of that place, what way it works, what way you exist in it, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Brilliantly done. Yep.
yeah. It,
Yeah. So. Oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead. I was going to
No, I
move
was
on.
going back to the prologue,
Yeah.
real quick, because there's one line that kind of stood out to me that was I was wondering if it's going to come up later because you have these two sorcerers sitting at a bar or a coffee or cafe of some sort, and they're talking to each other, and it's revealed that they're kind of enemies,
Hmm.
and they're both chuckling at the same joke, and they're surprised to find out how much they like each other. With all the pantomime of light and darkness getting in the way. And you don't hear about that the rest of the book, really.
No.
And so you're wondering what's all that about? What is all that about? And I, yeah, so that right off the bat, we're kind of thrown off the, it's almost like a red herring. Like
Yes,
we're
I
waiting for
agree.
that to come, and it doesn't come in this book. But when is it going to come?
Yeah.
You know, and there's also like a mention of Tsar Nicholas, and so you got to wonder you know if that guy's Rasputin, and who they're talking about there, and it's just vague references to other magical stuff, and then of course at the end of the prologue we get the Dennis seeing
Yes.
the young
And
Dennis seeing the bombings and all that stuff, and the city's secret vertebrae have made their
mm,
own decisions. And that's just a line at the end. And so you gotta wonder what that's about.
yeah. But you're totally right about a lot, because what it also sets up is this idea that the Great Wayne is actually London. if that makes sense. The London that we live in is just sort of like a superficial layer that lives on the top, but actually the events that happen in the Great Wayne are actually what control makes the world go round in some way. It has a lot of people out of time as a place out of time, and it's also used to start this idea of Jack the Ripper again, to tidy a previous amount of place and time in London. Again, that Victorian kind of thing that's kind of pushing back, but this idea that Jack the Ripper is still alive and well, which obviously forms very much the back end of this novel in the real world. So
Yeah.
again, I think that part's very clever, but it's introduced so gradually as we go along.
Yeah. 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 Very cool. Very cool stuff.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
excellent that
and
way.
I, and I love just to reinforce Dennis's youth in the first chapter here. The best way to start a book. He
Yes.
reinforced Dennis's youth. He does this undemanding self-assessment. Very convenient, right? Um, the closest he got to philosophy was the best way not to fail was obviously not to try, which I think brilliantly sets up his passive nature in the beginning of
Yeah.
the book, and it also sets us up for eventual change and eventual growth away from that.
Yeah.
It's great stuff.
Yeah. So moving on from those kind of events, because he goes back and he tries to return the book, and obviously the guy that sold him the book is dead, and then he's sent the chase and he ends up in the Great Wayne, comes back, but he all he really learns is that the Great Wayne's dangerous, and actually people that went there before were basically turned inside out. It was like almost the most horrific way to die, so there's like a fear of that place. But we get
Mm,
introduced to then the characters, the gangsters on one side, which is the real one, Jack Spot and his gang, who are supposedly
yeah.
fearsome, and that Dennis strikes a deal with in terms of like bargaining and setting up a meeting for Jack to kind of be touched with the Great Men. He kind of wings it a little bit and says, "Oh, I'll be able to do that for you. I've been there once," kind of thing to go ahead and do.
Mm,
But we get introduced to a group of characters who kind of seem to straddle both worlds in some way,
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and people who seem to go it. So in some cases, there are people that we think are more involved, like Prince Monolulu, who's the tipster. He probably uses the Great Wayne for his tipping in some ways, again, not really explored at that point. But then he sends him a message essentially to go see the artist Austin Spur,
Right.
and check that. So it gives the quest essentially some direction to go and do and go and see. And we find out that Mr. Spur has pretty good knowledge of what's going on to a certain degree and can help him and sort him out and be his guide into that next journey of his thing. And he's a fascinating character as well, because he is somebody that lives in a corner dungeon, whatever, but could be doing much better, quite well respected artist, that kind
Mm,
of stuff, as a
right.
magician on the side, and is sort of living within his means because he just wants to.
Yeah. Yeah. And it makes you wonder. You know, is he one of the sorcerers we see in the beginning of the prologue,
Yeah,
or is he? But he doesn't seem to. There's I don't get a hint that he is one of them. Uh,
yeah.
Maybe he is, but it's not relevant yet. I think
Hmm.
if that's the case, and his character is also one of those that you you're expecting something and you're getting something else. You
Hmm.
know, and so yeah, like you said, another brilliant, fun character.
And one mix I expect will reoccur in future novels. I would be very surprised if we didn't see him again. Prince Monolulu looks like he's gone out of hiding. He's out of the game now. He was scared enough to go and do. Um,
Yeah,
but we get introduced then to Jack Spot and then through to the other characters of the Great Wayne and the heavies of the
the
Great Wayne.
heavies.
The heavies of the Great Wayne. I mean,
Yeah.
again, talking about favorite scenes is when isn't it Jack Neve? Yeah, Jack Neve gets brought back
Mm.
to and he asks for the knife when Jack Spot's trying to threaten him.
Hmm.
And says, you know, you need to be careful. I got my two best heavies here, and he says, "Give me the knife." And he sticks it between his
Yeah.
eyes, and Jack Spot is like, "I'm out of my depth here. This is a whole
What?
new thing." Yeah, I don't know,
Yeah.
another guy who I was an Amphit maybe. Anyway, and another person that likes Dennis, you know, and is sort of looking out for Dennis and sort of sees Dennis's future in a lot of ways. You know, a lot of people respect Dennis and want to look out for him in some ways, and that these kind of people who think that they're running the city, like Jack Spot and all his men, are really nobodies in it, and they need to be careful. He's out of his depth.
Yeah. Yeah, that was one of my favorite lines was when oh, what was he when he was talking to Jack Spot after that scene with the knife in the forehead. Um, oh, jeez, I'll find it, but it was brilliant because he said he was like, "Oh, you're just a thief, but I'm the top thief. I'm the guy,"
Yeah,
you know. And I wanted to find that line because it was just so brilliant. But
yeah,
yeah, it was so interesting because you think Jack Spot's gonna be the big baddie,
yeah. You do.
you know? And once again, we're thrown for a loop, and he's actually not the big baddie. He's a pain in the butt, but he's he's not the big one. Oh yeah, he goes, "I know who you are, Jackie. You're a criminal, and as such are a shitty little particle of me, a bit of dirt beneath my priceless thumbnail. I know all your form and all your previous." And he knows I know what you call your teddy bear.
Yes.
I just that whole section was crack me up.
But I think it's quite important because as those events kind of transpire and we get to know what Jack Spot is actually afraid of, which is his partner who did the time and is coming out, Jack Spot is sort of reduced to being the scared little boy that we all think that Dennis is at the start of the book. You know, Dennis has
Exactly.
the dream of him later on about the cafe, and he gets the almost the foreshadowing or the pre what is the word?
Premonition?
Premonition. That's exactly
Yeah.
the one of what's going to happen. And we see again Jack Spot, who everybody seems to be afraid of, like Coffin, etc., is afraid of him at the start, but he
Yeah.
is the
Right.
young boy. And by the end of it, actually, whether the rest of our London knows it or otherwise, they should all be afraid of Dennis because Dennis has all of the people that who would be scary, making sure he's okay and looking out for him, and Grace to a certain extent as well. You know, so the people in power seem to be changing, and that's one of the things that makes I think the a promised 10-year really interesting. Because what does Dennis do? Because he still goes back and lives with Ada and all of that kind of stuff. They end up working the bookshop, but his life has changed. Who he is as a person has changed, and all of that kind of stuff. So I think that's absolutely fascinating to kind of follow and move forward.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And and it's because he's the one, it's because of Dennis, when he decides to take this proactive role, um, he's the one who got rid of the menace of Clive, you know,
Indeed.
and and he yeah, so he goes back to this bookseller role, but it is he is in a different headspace though. He's in a different there things are different things are important to him
Yeah.
when he goes back to there. And so I'm very interested to see where it goes from here.
Yeah. Before we're touching Clive, there's a couple of points I want to make about Dennis as a character, because obviously when he comes back the first time from the Great Way, and he's in the process of changing who he is, and he's left in charge of the shop, and he spots the woman who is being shifty in the back of the store, and we see she sees her twice in the book. You know, the girl who's looking at the crime books and is maybe thinking about stealing them or
Oh
otherwise,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
And I
yeah, yeah.
think those interactions that he has kind of show about his progression of character, because he chases her off the first time by being sharp-eyed, and the second time he just gives her a look and she runs away. And I think that says an awful lot about the changing nature
That's
of
good.
Dennis as a character
Yep.
beforehand, that he doesn't realize himself about where, you know, maybe how people are afraid of him or how people respect him, but the way he carries himself a little bit has changed, and people aren't going to mess with him in quite the same way as they would have just taken him for granted a little bit at the start. And I think again, really super subtle in terms of Moore's writing in that way, but I think also equally important about how people interact with him.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. Yeah, and that's funny because talking about Clive again, we
Mm,
meet Clive pretty early on. He's right
we
in
do.
chapter one, and he's talking to Clive. He thinks he's his friend, and Dennis wishes that his own voice was as middle class as Clive's. It had a
That's right.
ring of someone used to being listened to. So at first he's kind of wishing he's more like this guy, and then when we find out what Clive is, that
Yeah.
totally changes Dennis's perspective around, and he's scared of him. But he eventually leads him away and takes care of business.
Yeah, indeed. So, like, I don't know about you, but I was not initially. I think it was when they went to the cafe for this. They met up for the second time, I think, in the book, and he gets introduces him as a lord, and it's sort of again very playful because the guy doesn't want Dennis in his shop, and Clive tells the cafe owner that actually he's a lord in disguise, and he starts getting everything for free. Again,
Yeah.
I think there's some political subtext in there
Hmm.
about how people will treat people of privilege. But you start to get suspicious of Clive at that stage because you do realize, why would he be friendly with somebody like Dennis?
Right.
They do not mix in the same circles. They are not on a level.
Yep.
Um, Certainly in Clive's eyes intellectually, although as we see, I think actually as it turns out, Dennis, people just underestimated Dennis, and he underestimated Dennis in that way. But it does start to arouse suspicions at that stage
Yeah.
about what's actually going on there.
Yeah. And I think it also says something that Clive ends up being a monster that is also more being kind of cheeky about his social views, and
Yeah.
stuff. So
Well, he makes the point himself that how easy it would be to be a serial killer, by the links, between your victims, and if they're all different and changed, and it's sort of done in a playful nature to start off with.
yeah,
But as we go our way through the books and we discover, and Dennis discovers that actually Clive is the new Jack the Ripper in a lot of ways.
yep,
The depravity of some of those crimes as well. They're not just murders that Clive's been doing. There is a sickness with children, and that kind of stuff that again give it this very serious dark tone to what is a lot of times a playful kind of book. It has that kind of darkness and light and that effect without being the darkness and light that's referred to at the start of the book. In some ways, is that
right, yeah, yeah,
there is darkness and light, not just in terms of magic like the other books that we read, but very much that people have a darkness and lightness about them in ways that aren't always apparent.
yeah. You're right. Yeah, there's and it's this it's similar the like you said, the darkness and the light in people. Um, it's there's a flip side to that coin that's similar into the way that you have the mundane London and the magical
Absolutely, yeah,
London, and
excellent, yeah,
so he's just weaving those themes all throughout.
yeah. And it's Clive that's the one that's sneaking. He's the person that's hiding. He's the person that's watching and he sort of gets fascinated by the other level of the Great Wayne. He's been killing freely in his own world, and he sees this opportunity in the Great Wayne to kind
Yeah,
of do something else. Like, a lot of people are very um, fascinated by the ideas in the Great Wayne, of the power that it will give them, of the strength that will get him. Dennis doesn't see any of that. In fact, he just doesn't want to be there because he's still thinking about the guy that was turned inside out. I mean, that's
yeah,
again that kind of almost simpleton kind of view of what would be a very dangerous situation. But by the time he comes to deal with Harry Ludd and all those really properly scary people within the world, he's not he's not phased by that in the same way, because he's not afraid of that outcome. He's more afraid of the other stuff that he's being told about and Coffin Ada, as we talked about before.
yeah, yeah. Because he's been set up to be, because when he, when Ada and finds out that he has this book,
Hmm.
there's not there's all of a sudden Ada changes. She's like, "Oh no, you're in trouble," you
Yeah.
know, and she warns him, make sure that you don't tell anybody about this place. You don't tell anybody, and he's been warned against it. He knows so he gets a sense that this place he doesn't understand. Like he wouldn't think that it could be used to his advantage because
Yes.
it's not something. It's something that when people know about it, they disappear. They're gone. They're no longer living or just not around. And so he's his character. We were introduced to his naivety in the beginning, and
Hmm.
that its general trait sticks with him, even though he's learning how to grow up in other ways. That general trait sticks with him, so he's not going to make that leap to say, "Oh, wait, I can use this to my advantage. I can get power." Like somebody like Clive would, who's just a um, well, he's psychotic, but
Yeah. He's a sociopath, and everything that he does, and the locations that he picks to meet, he kind of does all of his business out in open, and isn't doesn't think anybody will catch him. That he's smarter than everybody else, and we get to see that nasty side when he's chasing Dennis through the Great
yeah,
Wen, and Dennis's comfortableness growing within the Great Wen is ultimately the thing that saves him, because he's able to
yeah,
set a trap essentially for Clive to get devoured. I mean, when he get caught and eaten, I mean, that's quite dark.
oh yeah, yeah, that was
But also we're cheering along, kind of going, "You go, Dennis.
yep,
You've got it sorted." I wanted
yeah,
to touch actually on the way that Moore writes the Great Wayne, because I think that's really sort of fascinating, and I
it
think
is fascinating.
especially the first couple of times that he goes in,
Yeah,
those bits are very hard to read.
yeah,
It's like almost a sensory overload for the reader, because it's description after description, like spiders and boxes, and it's all happened. But again, I think incredibly intentional by Moore, because we sort of are a bit discombobulated as the reader as much as Dennis is. There's too
yeah,
much happening for him to make sense of. Everything's a threat to him on the ground, everything's scary. And it's only as we make our way through the book and events start to happen that the writing changes very subtly. You can still say it's definitely in the same way, but there's details that start to come out. There's events that start to come out. There's relationships. Like even the moment when he spots the author Arthur Macken in that world, who wrote the book. Again, I feel like that's going to be a key event in future
mm,
books. Is that Arthur's there in the Great Wayne who
maybe,
wrote the
yeah,
book? And again, it's a singular line. He just sees him and then goes on. Um, the way that Moore writes that, I think, is incredible, because I think he uses words and punctuation and lack of punctuation in a way to confuse and confuddle the reader at certain points, to aid the sensory feeling of what the Great Wind's like.
yeah, yeah, and especially the first time when you first come
Yes.
across it, because he doesn't he stops capitalization.
Yep.
He stops, every paragraph ends with 3 dots rather than, like there's something that's supposed to be continuing, but it's not. It just morphs into something else as he moves into the next paragraph, and every sentence is kind of morphing into some other thing as the
That's right.
sentence is going along. It's not a consistent, uh, narrative sentence. It's just constantly evolving into strange, and it's just crazy. It's really crazy to get thrown at you when he makes that plunge forward, when he crosses that portal of this portal part of the fantasy, when he plunges into that, and suddenly he's on his knees and puking in pellucid heaven, spattering the gutters made from gold, where scuttling to his vomits thin meniscus on those auric cobbles, there are bottle caps with brewery insignias and spider legs of silvered cork, and it just goes on like that.
Yeah.
And you're like, what did I just run into as the reader? And yeah, admittedly, that is probably going to be the biggest thing obstacle people might have to get over at first when
Yes.
you are first shoved into there. And I think, like you said, by the time you get to the end of the book, though, you get used to it,
Yeah.
and you start looking at it, and you start enjoying it, and it becomes fun once you start taking it apart. And I liked it. By the end, I liked it. I started writing
Yeah.
like it. It was great.
Yeah. Well, it's exactly as you say. There's a just like Dennis, we start to not just be afraid of this world. Not be, we're not hoping we survive to get out of it. We're starting to look at details. We're starting to actually think about what is happening around. Starting in the meeting with Harry Ludd, etc. He's able to look around him and see the people
Mhm.
that are there, and he spots certain features that help him later on with his premonitions, etc. The bags, etc. How he finds out about Clive, etc. There are certain things that come through, and again, your perspective of what the Great Wayne is totally changed, because I remember at the start, after reading the first section, and it is quite short in comparison to some of the other ones, I was like
Mhm.
flicking through and you go, oh, here's a very long section of italicized text, which is the way that he indicates that it's the Great Wayne. I was like,
Yeah.
oh my god, this is gonna be tough.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and you can sit there and you can sit there and wonder, "Wow, could he have done something different to make it easier on the reader?" But as you go on and you get towards the end of the book, you actually appreciate what he did to you at the beginning of the book with the first immersion into the Great One, because you wouldn't have got um, the same sense of accomplishment for reading it later, the same sense of enjoyment reading it later, because you have literally changed your brain to adjust to the prose and
Yeah,
actually let it sink in, and you're able to now self-correct and enjoy what's on the page, and you take it apart, and it ends up being real fun to
yeah,
do that.
yeah. And it sort of brings me round to kind of full circle to kind of say about this book that it wasn't until I got to that stage at the very end and I started trying to think about what we were going to talk about when I said, "Right, we need to have a discussion about this," because it was like, there's so much going on here. It's more than surface level. I
Mhm.
think we had the conversation the other week about classic books and modern books. And like, I think that classic books did an awful lot more of like doing metaphor and kind of things in the background in terms of tying the story together, that this book definitely does all the way through. Like, there's nothing by
Oh,
accident.
yeah.
Everything's planned. Everything's meticulous about having two meanings or are being used in double sense. This book is a feat of literature. Like, in ways that I didn't appreciate as I was making my way through in small bits until you kind of get to the end and start to look back. Like, we even talked about the names of some of the chapters. I just think it's so good the way it's sort of structured, the music at the beginning, the best way to start a book. And then we get the cat shit manner, a popes and potpourri, and then Self as Hitler, which I think is an absolutely fascinating chapter where they go to the art gallery. Because again,
Yeah.
it's a departure from the rest of the book, from all the other events that are going, but where he uses art appreciation to talk about self and talk about people and talk about
Yeah.
who we are as people and about who bad people are and good people are. Like, it's very, very clever the way it's done, but also very entertaining to read.
Yeah. I agree, man. That's perfectly put.
Yeah.
Perfectly put. Yeah.
So on to the kind of political or politicized nature of the book. Moore rarely misses the mark when he does an awful lot of this stuff when he's talking about theming that he wants to do, and a lot of it I do feel like there is a sense of the crooks that we see in our modern world are like low level crooks. They're like guys who aren't the big bad, if you know what I mean. There are worse things in the world than these people that are reaching for money that think they run the world. I sort of see a lot of the people that we'd be afraid of in modern society as being Jack Spot, as being sort of trying to chase away from some things and that kind of sense. I sort of get that that's the representation that he's looking at, but there are people in the background that are much more in control of things and we should be afraid of. It was one of the things that I got out of it, certainly anyway.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I can definitely agree with that. And there's different levels of fear. that
Yeah,
Dennis takes on as he goes through the story. You know, his fears at the beginning are the fears that everybody has. That how are you going to make a living? How are you going to please your boss? How are you going to get out from under her thumb?
yeah,
And how are you going to ask a girl out? And how are you going to, you know, the general fears that young adults have. But then it transforms into, oh, how are you going to stay away from? How are you not going to get, you know, taken advantage of by somebody like Jack Spot or somebody,
yeah,
or even
true.
just making a deal with books? How are you not going to get taken advantage of with that?
Yeah,
And it elevates slowly until we get, oh, there's a bigger bad out there that
yeah.
I don't even think we've been fully introduced to
Full of it.
yet
Yeah, I would agree with that.
in this
Yeah,
series. And that elevation of, well, what's the real, what's the real evil here? What's the real um, problem with society?
yeah.
And that section on Hitler as self in the art gallery and all that stuff. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
this is right after Hitler bombed London.
Indeed. Yeah,
And so Hitler is the ultimate expression of something that's big and evil beyond, way beyond most people's control. And I think Moore is trying to represent that um, with the escalation of the chaos that the Great Wind could
mm,
possibly bring to his mundane world, and
yeah,
brilliantly done.
yeah. He also takes a big swipe at multiple points at I think Brexit and especially nationalism. There's one of the sections I highlighted was we can have a decent country, we can have the decent country we've been guaranteed, or we can keep up the illusion that we're still a great one. But I can't see that we'll have the money to do both. And knowing us, will probably decide destitution's not too bad, so long as you can dress it up as in a Union Jack waistcoat, and that identity is more important to some people than prosperity or anything like that. He does it a few times within the book, and like I say, um not unlike Alan Moore in
Oh
any
yeah,
way to be kind of trying to put that in there. Like it's not there, it's subtle in a lot of ways.
so,
That a lot of things are subtle in this book as well, but there definitely are underlying messages, which I think we often talk about how the arts are under attack and how arts are important in a lot of ways in life. And I think the arts should continue to challenge in the same way that the paintings, like the Hitler painting, etc., was doing within the book itself, getting you to look at it and look at yourself as Hitler and that he was a boy once or otherwise. So,
yeah, yeah, brilliant. All right.
so yeah, lot in there. Have you any talking points that you want to bring up, Jared? Whether they're just things that struck you that might come up in the future, or you know things that you think are worth
Yeah.
talking about?
Um, the there was a mention of uh when he's like stumbling down a highway uh that was famously
Oh
all
yeah.
gutter. And I think this was in, oh, what chapter was this in? It was in chapter 1 still. And
Ah,
he says something like mythology was only visible from far away. The place that people conjured when they thought about the city and its landmarks was nowhere in evidence. So he's pointing out the um, that his London is mundane,
yeah.
demolished in the war, and that the mythology of London is hiding. And so I like
Mm,
that little reference to what's coming up, because this is long before we hit the Great Win,
yeah.
you know? And
I also thought that was in reference to the way people view London from the outside who
yeah,
don't live there. You know what I mean?
I
When people are kind
yeah,
of use it as a tourist destination, it doesn't match the reality of what it's like to live in it and to exist in it. These two things are very different. People think of Buckingham Palace, the Westminster, all of that kind of stuff as a
yeah,
tourist destination, but he's living in relative poverty, and he doesn't get to see any of the grandeur or the levels of wealth that obviously exists within London. I think that was a great. That bit stuck in my head at the time as well.
yeah, and I think that can be true for really any
Yeah,
place that you visit, on Earth. I'm sure you've heard a lot about stuff you can do in Boston, um, but I'll let you know it's just another city, you know.
That
And
it's great.
but yeah, so I think that was just very clever stuff. Um, and there was another line here. Um, yeah, like nearly everyone he knew, he much preferred to play his life as a light comedy, and didn't think he could take a shift of genre. And I thought
Mhm.
that was just bloody brilliant,
Yeah,
because really that was in chapter 2, A London Walk, and he that just tells us that you know you look at shows like situational comedies. They're always
mhm,
fun, they're always lighthearted. Occasionally they get a little dramatic, but for the most part, everything turns out all right. And that's what people want. They want things to turn out all right, and
yeah,
that's in changing your genre, so to speak, is really a major shakeup. You don't want to live in a horrific post-apocalyptic fiction. You don't want to live in,
yeah,
a war movie, because that's what London came out of. So you want that happy endings, that everything's going to be
yeah.
okay, if not necessarily great, but okay. So
Love that point. That's yeah, that's really interesting.
yeah,
Yeah,
and it also it kind of points to Dennis's state of mind too, that early on.
it does.
Uh,
It also talks about Moore himself and his own career. I think in some ways, he's sort of known for a certain type and tone in a lot of his
mm,
work, and that people sort of turn up for that kind of idea um, when they go to his work.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, and let's see, Enoch's. Oh, oh yeah, he's talking about a book called Fungoids by this chap named Enoch Soames,
Oh
and
yes, yeah, yeah.
Enoch doesn't exist. He's from the story from Max Beerbohm. Beerbohm.
Hmm.
That's hilarious. Now that I say that out loud, that's kind of hilarious. Uh, uh,
He does like using. I have to say, in a lot of his names, he likes to mix up the harsh sounds with the soft sounds. So like he has done this knuckle yard,
yeah,
which is good, and then similarly Jack, he uses Jack quite a lot in it. It has those
yeah, he does.
K's in it, those kind of sort of sounds, the Neve and that kind of stuff. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, you're right. Yeah, yeah, and Max Beerbohm.
yeah.
Um,
There's
who's a disregarded poet from the 90s, travels to the future seeking his posterity only to learn that he's remembered as a story by Max Beerbohm. So it he's playing with that idea right there of
yeah,
fiction and what is real and what is not out of fiction. And it's once again, this is before we get the discovery that there is a great when. So just little things that stood out to me to give you a hint that you know things that there's a play with the idea of fiction and the idea of storytelling in there with genre and all that different
yeah,
stuff. So very cool stuff.
yeah. Yeah, loads of cool stuff, and like you said at the start, I get the feeling that if I read another couple of books in the series and then come back to it, there'll be even more to glean from it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's
Yeah.
it seems like this is pretty planned. This is
Hmm.
uh he's not just writing off the cuff and saying, "Oh, maybe I'll do another novel in this world." No, it seems like this was a planned thing to do five, I think, and
Yeah.
that he sets up a ton in this book that I have a feeling we're going to come back to later and go, "Oh, okay, uh, that was pretty amazing,"
Exciting.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
I,
it's and he does that with telling you an exciting story as well. It's not all
yes,
just
he
setup.
does. Yeah,
The whole
yeah,
book's not just setup. It's
yeah.
a great plot. It's a great story. um, and it's a ton of fun too. Whole ton of fun.
Yeah, definitely. I sort of hope it picks up readership and that kind of stuff over the time when before the next book comes out and into that, so that we can maybe pick up another couple of people along our conversations as we go
Yeah,
along
yeah,
here. But yes, a massively enjoyable read. Yeah, very much so.
agreed.
Right. Thank you very much, Jared. If anybody wanted to find you somewhere, where might they find you?
I think you can find me on the Fantasy Thinker YouTube channel, and you can find me at pagechewing.com on podcasts there, like Speculative Speculations and the Oscar Project and
Yeah,
some other
yeah,
ones too. Um,
yeah.
and you finally can find me on the Chronicle of Chris's channel.
That's right. That's right, indeed. I'm very glad to break that duck, and I will have a brand new video out in the channel for God knows how long. Maybe I'll have to use this as impetus to keep on making some more very soon.
Awesome.
But I really appreciate you coming to chat and for also the inspiration to pick up this book. Even just by mentioning something, I would just kind of it jumped into my hand in the bookstore. So yeah,
Oh, that's
long may
great.
that continue.
So you finally got the inspiration to pick up a book that Vasha didn't make you read.
Right, our good friend Varsha. Yes, this fell outside it. If I feel like we're cheating on her, Jared, if I'm honest, I
Oh
sort of
no.
feel bad that she's not here. But there's plenty more discussions with us with the Varsha, and we'll see if we can
Oh
talk
yeah.
Varsha into joining us further on down the line. And like I say, there's a great review of the Great Win on Jared's channel, where there's even some twinkly lights, without spoilers. Thanks very much, everybody, and we'll catch you again soon. Take care.